A renter's credit could help every eligible taxpayer afford housing and improve their quality of life, working together with other essential supports to help the American housing crisis and be a tremendous value to not only those individuals individually, but also to them and their families. And now it's my pleasure to yield to my colleague and friend Jimmy Jimmy Gomez from California.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First, let me say I'm proud to join my Renter Caucus colleagues, Congressman Davis, to introduce this important legislation, the Rent Relief Act. This is a key effort of the Renters Caucus, which I founded with other members this year to give a voice to renters in the halls of Congress. As the cost of home ownership continues to skyrocket, more Americans are renting, which means they are ineligible for crucial tax deduction like the mortgage interest deduction or low-income mortgage tax credit. These tax credits exist to help homeowners, but they should also help renters too. It's time to pass the Rent Relief Act to make sure that our nation's renters, a growing group that is feeling the burden of increased rent costs that often outpaces the increases in real wages. For the first time since data started being recorded 20 years ago, the average American renter is now considered rent burden, meaning they pay over 30% of their income to rent. This imbalance has led families in my district in Los Angeles and across the country to be forced to compromise on basic needs like food, clothing, healthcare to keep a roof over their heads and the lights on. Our Rent Relief Act seeks to bridge this gap and alleviate the burden faced by low-income and middle-income renters. It is the embodiment of our commitment to providing real relief by sending a monthly tax credit directly into the pockets of those who need it most. Just like the child tax credit was a lifeline for working families, cutting child poverty nearly in half, the Rent Relief Act aims to emulate that success and build upon it. This bill is not just about financial assistance, it's about restoring dignity and providing stability. By easing the strain of high rental costs, we'll give parents the peace of mind that their children have a stable place to call home. The Rent Relief Act is a lifeline for those who have felt the pressure of housing insecurity. It's a reminder that our nation's strength is measured not only by its prosperity, but it's by its ability to uplift those who need it the most. So I look forward in trying to move this bill, and since I'll be now back on the Ways and Means Committee, we're going to be able to push a little bit harder. So I'm looking forward to joining my colleagues, Danny Davis and Jimmy Panetta, on their great work on that important committee. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much. And now we will hear from Representative Panetta, who is also on the Ways and Means Committee and from California.
There you go.
Representative Panetta.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me obviously thank members of the press who are here. Let me thank the stakeholders who have been an essential part of formulating this bill. And of course, let me thank the partnership and the leadership of Danny Davis, Jimmy Gomez, and Scott Peters for putting together an essential piece of legislation that will be so beneficial to my constituents in the 19th Congressional District. Once again, I am Jimmy Panetta, and I proudly represent the 19th Congressional District. However, I have the distinction, the ignominious distinction, to have the most expensive place to rent in the United States of America. A report by the National Low-Income Housing Coalition found that in Santa Cruz County, to afford an average two-bedroom apartment, a person must make $63.33 an hour. In Santa Clara County, just north of Santa Cruz County, a person must make $61 an hour. And in Monterey County, a person must make $57 an hour. What that means is that with the minimum wage in California of $15.50, an average worker would have to have 3 full-time jobs to afford to rent in the 19th Congressional District. Nearly 70% of the workers in my district cannot afford to rent. What that means is that it's easy to work in the 19th Congressional District, but it's very, very difficult to live in the 19th Congressional District. And what that means is that we have way too many people spending way too much time in our commute and too little time in our communities and too little time with their families. Now, being on the Ways and Means Committee, we are working hard to adjust the tax code for more low-income housing, for more workforce housing, to put more homes on the market. And with this Rental Relief Act, we're going to put more people in their homes and keep more people in their homes. By allowing them to obtain this federal tax credit each month, this bill is not just about paying rent, let's make that clear, but the Rent Relief Act is about affordability for families, and it is about strengthening our communities. So I look forward to being a part of this effort to make sure that we pass the Rent Relief Act and making sure that we can keep families affording housing, not just in my district, but throughout the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Panetta. And now we will hear from Ms. Sarah Sadane with the National Low Income Housing Coalition.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sarah Sadine. It's nice to be here today on behalf of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And I want to thank Senator Warnock and Representatives Davis, Gomez, Peters, and Panetta for their leadership in introducing this bold and innovative proposal to help millions of the lowest income people afford their homes. Across the nation, 10 million of our lowest income neighbors are paying at least half of their income on rent. And that means that they don't have the resources left over to put healthy food on the table, to pay for needed medications, or to make ends meet. And they're always one financial shock away from falling behind on rent, facing eviction, and in worst cases, homelessness. Our housing crisis has existed for decades, but in many ways it's worse now than it's ever been before. Rents are high, eviction filings are up, and homelessness is increasing in many communities. 500,000 people are experiencing homelessness on any given night, and millions more are at risk. But despite the clear need, Congress underfunds the solutions that are needed to help people afford a home. Only 1 in 4 people who are eligible for housing assistance gets any sort of help, and the rest are left to fend for themselves. A new renter's tax credit, like the one proposed today, has the power to transform lives. It would help serve those households that are eligible for housing assistance but can't get it. And in doing so, it can improve every quality of life that they have, every measure of quality of life, including their health care, their education, their economic mobility, and more. And that's why we're proud to stand here with the Congress members to introduce this bill, and why so many leading organizations from the healthcare sector, from civil rights, from the faith-based organizations, anti-poverty organizations are here as well. So I want to encourage Congress to move this bill forward along with other housing investments and to help end homelessness and housing poverty once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we hear from Charlotte Bruce with the Children's Health Watch.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you to Congressman Davis, Gomez, Peters, and Panetta for gathering us here today with the introduction of the Rent Relief Act. My name is Charlotte Bruce, and I'm the Senior Research and Policy Analyst with Children's Health Watch, which is a national network, nonpartisan network of pediatricians and child health researchers. There's no greater predictor of health than where someone lives. Our research is conducted on the front lines of healthcare in hospitals across the U.S., and it consistently shows that children and their families need access to safe, stable, and affordable homes throughout their life in order to thrive. However, across the country, the increasing cost of housing and inadequate supply of housing combined means that millions of families are unable to afford a safe and reliable home. Too often and too easily, they fall behind on rent and become unstably housed or homeless. Our research shows that children and families that have been behind on rent within the last year are more likely to have developmental delays, be hospitalized, and be in poor health. Their mothers are much likelier to be in poor health and to have symptoms of maternal depression. This has hindered the health, educational achievement, and upward mobility of children and families across our country for years, resulting in cycles of poverty and poor health outcomes disproportionately among children and families of color. Early childhood is a critical window of brain and body development. A stable home early in life is the foundation for a good child's health. The Rent Relief Act is a bold and innovative solution to bridge the growing gap between a family's income and housing costs. It will allow families to meet their children's basic needs without falling behind on rent or making excruciating decisions between rent and putting food on the table or a safe place to stay and accessing medical care and prescriptions. Our pediatricians often tell us that the prescription they want to give their patients is a healthy home. The Rent Relief Act is that prescription. It is evidence-based and an investment that pays dividends in the form of healthier and more resilient communities. On behalf of the network of pediatricians that I work with, I am grateful to the bill co-sponsors for recognizing the urgency and the transformative impact that stable housing can have on the lives of the families that we serve and our patients. Together, let us build a brighter, healthier future for our children where everyone is able to access housing, where it is not a luxury but a basic right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Representative Peters is now here, and he's on energy and commerce and in budget, and also from California.
Thank you very much, David. Appreciate it. Good afternoon. And thanks for having me, Congressman. I'm Scott Peters. I represent San Diego. I'm happy to be here to help introduce the Rent Relief Act with my colleagues, Congressman Davis, Gomez, and Panetta. This year, the U.S. News and World Report found that San Diego is the most expensive place to live in the country. The most expensive place to live in the country. Every day, San Diegans face rising rent and housing costs, in which so much of their disposable income is going toward rent. Many are faced with tough decisions on how they pay their bills for groceries or for other necessities, and unfortunately some are pushed into homelessness. The tax credit proposed by the Rent Relief Act would provide much needed relief and stability for families across the country who have trouble keeping up with rising costs. Bridging the gap between income and rent for low and middle income families is vital for the prosperity and well-being of our communities. The Rent Relief Act would help keep people in their homes, preventing them from potentially falling into homelessness. If we can keep families in their homes, not only do we prevent that traumatic experience, we also prevent those families from needing additional governmental aid in the future, saving us money. Through the Rent Relief Act's tax credit, targeting relief toward renters who need it, that allows us to provide near immediate help to people in the short term, while local, state, and federal governments work toward long-term solutions to the nation's housing shortage. Thanks for coming out today in support of the Rent Relief Act. I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues to getting this important legislation passed and signed. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Peters, and we look forward to working with you. And now we have Selena Sherzad with Church World Service. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Selena Sherzad, and I am the Housing Policy and Advocacy Coordinator with Church World Service, one of 10 major refugee resettlement agencies in the country, stretching across the nation to receive, support, and integrate newly arrived refugees, unaccompanied children, and other newcomers. As I stand here alongside this community of advocates who believe rent relief is imperative towards seeing the most vulnerable find balance, it is not only apparent but essential that we see the Rent Relief Act of 2023 passed by Congress. I represent our local providers who serve individuals who have fled their home nations due to war, persecution, and many other unfortunate circumstances. Many who have lost family members and friends, lost jobs and opportunities, gave up schooling, their homes, and their communities. Congress has an important role to play to ensure that the administration is equipping our communities with the resources and capacity they need to help new arrivals rebuild their lives in safety. Resettlement agencies are mandated to ensure refugee arrivals have safe housing to set up for them before they're resettled in the U.S. And we know that secure housing is a place to ground social, emotional, and economic well-being. Fundamentally, our core value is that everyone has a safe place to call home. Refugees are processed through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and receive resettlement services such as cash and medical assistance, food and grocery assistance, job training, English language classes, and housing assistance. Unfortunately, the need for services, especially housing assistance, far outweighs what our offices can provide. Housing is a particularly acute challenge for new arrivals who often don't have credit history, employment history, or English language fluency. Although our local offices have relationships with many landlords, today's housing market has created a massive disparity between the expectation of properly supporting newcomers and reality. Developing inclusive legislation that notes all vulnerable populations, especially newcomers who frequently experience discrimination in the housing sector, is something that must be acknowledged. CWS firmly believes that forward-looking ideas like that of the Rental Relief Act of 2023 will meet the needs of new Americans as they stabilize their new lives in the United States. The Rent Relief Act of 2023's commitments to help cost-burdened renters bridge the gap between income and rent, ensuring the lowest income families benefit, and overcoming administrative barriers that often prevent households from accessing housing or direct ways, this legislation will not only touch, but directly support the newcomer population across the nation. We also note how critical robust congressional funding is to equipping our communities with resources to ensure newcomers have affordable and stable housing, particularly for large families. As a former local housing coordinator, I have worked extensively with varying family units and individuals who have struggled to enter into the American housing market without adequate financial support. People like Fahima, an Afghan woman, widowed, and the mother of 3 children, each under the age of 5, was resettled in the United States following the fall of Kabul. Her and her 3 children arrived in the United States and were immediately placed in a temporary unit until I could find a place for them to stay. Days turned into weeks and months until finally a house was secured, but with a rental price that would require working overtime on top of a standard shift. Additionally, she would need to cover childcare, transportation, education fees, immigration fees, and many more basics just to live soundly with her 3 children. The reality of Fahima's story is unfortunately not a unique one, but rather one that countless others who struggle to support themselves and their dependents experience as housing prices stretch far too high. Housing is a social determinant of overall health and well-being. Our nation's leaders have a moral imperative to take on this challenge and urgently pass the Rent Relief Act of 2023. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our final speaker is Patty Cole with 0 to 3.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Representative Davis. Always a baby champion, and we want to say thank you to Representatives Peters, Panetta, and Gomez, as well as Senator Warnock for your leadership. I'm Patty Cole. I'm representing 0 to 3, which is an organization whose mission is to ensure that all babies and toddlers have what they need to thrive. So the Rent Relief Act would offer a lifeline that's particularly important to families with young children who are among the millions of renters who are burdened by high housing costs that force them to make impossible choices that they tell us about all the time, between keeping a stable house over their children's heads or buying necessities like paying the utilities or food, or for babies, diapers. I want to emphasize that we see this as a child development program. For babies, the safe, stable, affordable housing is really the emotional and social center of family life. And it's the external architecture, if you could think about it that way, that provides the setting of the close relationships that shape the internal architecture of the developing brain of a young child. So when this fundamentally important place becomes unstable or unsafe, then babies' rapid development, as Charlotte told you, is put at risk, and it leaves them susceptible to long-term development and health problems. So this year, 0 to 3's State of Babies Yearbook highlighted unstable housing as one of 5 urgent issues that Congress needs to address, calling it the hidden developmental threat for our babies. Almost 1.7 million babies live in crowded housing, and that includes 1 in 4 babies in families with low income. So that means 1 million babies live in housing that, combined with their economic insecurity, can create great stress for them and their families. And when coupled with poverty, research has found that living in crowded housing early in life can really affect adult health outcomes, including early death. So rising housing costs, coupled with this economic insecurity that engulfs many infants and toddlers, mean that housing, and just as important, worries about housing, is a major source of threats to families' lives. So the yearbook talks about how Black and Latina families are much more likely to report difficulty paying for their rent or their mortgage. And equally important for babies who are really sensitive to their caregivers' mental well-being is they worry about paying for rent or mortgage, or that their utilities will be cut off. And this is a source of great family stress. So we see that we have two ways that unstable housing affects families with young children. It creates a stressful family environment, but it also uses resources that can meet other key needs like food and childcare, clothing, and of course diapers. So the tax credit and the Rent Relief Act can help provide families, including those with young children, this financial relief from rising housing costs that they desperately need. So when housing takes less of a bite out of a family's budget, that means that parents are less stressed and they can be more joyous and interacting with their children. Babies have room to grow, and of course there's more money for those basic needs. So that's why we at 0 to 3 are urging Congress to quickly enact this important child development bill, the Rent Relief Act, to help close the gaps for millions of households and give more children a place where they can thrive. And that's why we so appreciate our baby champion, Congressman Davis. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and let me just thank all of our participants and indicate that we look forward to working with Senator Warnock, with Representatives Peters, Gomez, and Panetta, as well as all of the advocates who have spoken here today. And I can't help but recall that one of the first programs that I ever worked with was the 0 to 3 program more than 40 years ago. If there are any questions, we would be delighted to